In the dying light of a golden evening, the desert stretched endlessly, painted in amber and dust. The wind whispered across the canyon, carrying the cry of a hawk and the faint echo of hooves. Somewhere between the wilderness and the mountains, a lone woman ran, her crimson dress torn, her hands trembling as she stumbled through the thorny brush. Her breath came in sharp, uneven gasps. Behind her, the land itself seemed to hold its breath. She didn't know who was following her anymore: men, ghosts, or the wrath of a world that had long stopped caring for the weak. She had fled the small frontier town that morning, leaving behind the sound of church bells and angry shouts. Someone had screamed her name. Someone had called her a thief, a liar, and worse. She didn't stop to explain. No one there would have listened. She had trusted the wrong man, believed his promises, and now she carried the weight of his crimes. The townsfolk had already made up their minds. And when men with rifles began to ride after her, she knew there was no place left for her among them. By dusk, her horse had collapsed. She had walked for miles, barefoot, her skirts heavy with dust and fear. Now, as the cold began to creep across the plains, she heard something that froze her blood, the distant drumming of hooves again. But this time, it wasn't the lawmen from town. These were heavier, slower. Came with a rhythm that didn't belong to the white man's world. The woman stumbled into a clearing where the canyon opened wide, revealing the dying fire of the sunset. Then she saw him. A tall figure stood near the edge of the ridge, bare-chested, his skin bronze under the sun's last glow. His long black hair moved like a shadow in the wind, and around his neck hung tribal jewelry made of bone and feathers. A bow rested across his back, and a knife glimmered at his belt. His gaze was sharp and unreadable, and when she froze, he didn't move. Didn't speak, only watched her, as if deciding whether she was a spirit or a threat. Her first instinct was to run, but her knees gave out beneath her. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking like dry grass. "Please, I'm innocent." For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Then the warrior stepped forward, his movements calm yet powerful, like the land itself obeyed his rhythm. He knelt beside her, and she could smell the wild scent of smoke and pine on him. His dark eyes studied her face, her bruised wrists, the torn edges of her dress. He said something in his language, low, musical, almost like a prayer. She didn't understand, but there was no anger in his tone. When her shivering worsened, he reached out and wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. Then, without a word, he lifted her into his arms. The warmth of his skin startled her. It wasn't the cold indifference of the world she had known. It was alive, strong, protective. She wanted to speak, to tell him not to hurt her. But the exhaustion finally claimed her. She fainted in his hold. When she opened her eyes again, the night sky was thick with stars. A fire crackled nearby, throwing orange light against the canyon walls. She lay on a bed of furs inside a small cave. The warrior was sitting a few steps away, sharpening his knife, his face half lit by the flames. For a moment, she watched him quietly, fear in her chest slowly melting into something she didn't yet understand. He noticed her wakefulness and spoke a few words. She shook her head weakly, trying to find her voice. "I don't understand," she murmured. He frowned slightly, then poured water into a wooden cup and handed it to her. She hesitated, then took it. It was cool and clean, like a promise. Hours passed in silence. Outside, wolves howled far away, and the wind moaned through the rocks. She tried to sleep, but her mind kept replaying the chaos, the angry faces in town, the sound of the sheriff's boots, the flash of a gun. She had done nothing wrong, yet the whole world seemed determined to crush her. When she finally whispered, "Why did you help me?" He didn't answer right away. He stared into the fire, his expression distant, then said something soft in broken English. "No woman. Alone in the land of hate." His voice was low and steady, carrying the weight of an old sorrow. Something in those words struck her deeply. He understood what it meant to be hunted, perhaps, not by the same people, but by the same kind of cruelty. She saw the scars on his shoulders, the marks of battles and loss. The world had wronged them both, though in different tongues and colors, as the fire dimmed. He stood and stepped toward the cave's entrance. "Sleep," he said simply, his voice rough but not unkind. She wanted to ask his name, but her throat felt dry again. He disappeared into the shadows outside, leaving her with the flickering light and the whispering wind. She lay awake, listening. Every sound out there seemed alive: the rustle of leaves, the creak of leather, the shifting of distant stones. Somewhere in the dark, the warrior kept watch. She didn't know why she trusted him, but somehow she did. Maybe because for the first time in a long while, someone had looked at her without judgment. When dawn broke, golden light spilled into the cave. The warrior was gone, but his tracks led down toward the river. She followed, cautious but curious, until she saw him kneeling by the water, washing a wound on his arm. He didn't look up as she approached, only said, "You go back. White Town hunt again." "I can't," she replied softly. "They'll kill me." He finally looked at her, and his eyes darkened not in anger, but in understanding. "Then you stay. But no trust easy. My people no trust white faces." She nodded, lowering her gaze. She knew what that meant. She wasn't safe here either, not truly. Yet there was nowhere else left for her. They traveled together that day, wordless but watchful. She rode his black horse while he walked beside her, guiding the path through narrow canyons and sun-scorched plains. The silence between them grew heavy, but not hostile. Like two souls bound by a shared fate they didn't yet comprehend. By sunset, smoke appeared on the horizon, thin gray line rising from the direction of the town she had fled. She froze, gripping the reins tightly. "They're coming," she whispered. The warrior's eyes followed the smoke, then shifted to the mountains. "If they come with fire. You ready?" "I'm not ready for anything," she said, her voice shaking. He stepped closer, placing a hand on the horse's neck to calm it. Then his gaze met hers, steady and fierce. "No more run," he said. "You stand." She looked into his eyes, feeling the strength in them, the kind of strength born from surviving the impossible. Something inside her shifted, spark of courage flickering where there had only been fear. But before she could reply, a distant gunshot cracked through the valley. The horse reared, and the warrior caught her before she fell. His hand gripped her arm as the echo rolled through the canyons. Dust rose in the distance, riders approaching fast. He pulled her close, his voice sharp and urgent. "They find us." Her heart pounded as he swung onto the horse behind her, his arms wrapping around her to hold her steady. She could feel his heartbeat against her, back-strong and unyielding. The wind roared as the horse surged forward into the wilderness. Behind them, the shouts of men grew louder. Ahead, the mountains loomed, wild and unforgiving. She didn't know what waited for them beyond those cliffs, safety or death. But she knew one thing. For the first time in her life, she wasn't running alone, and as the horse vanished into the rising storm of dust, she felt the warmth of his arms tighten around her, the silent promise of a warrior who would fight the world itself to protect the innocent. Then the sky darkened, and the chase began. The wind howled through the canyon as the horse thundered across the rocky trail. The woman clung tightly to the reins, her pulse racing, her heart slamming against her ribs. Behind them, faint echoes of gunfire and men's shouts chased the night. Dust rose from the hooves like smoke, blurring the edges of the desert. The Apache warrior's strong arms steadied her, guiding the horse with quiet control. He didn't speak, but his sharp eyes scanned the horizon for danger, reading the land like a language she couldn't understand. When the sounds of pursuit faded, he slowed the horse near a cluster of boulders. Moonlight bathed the valley in silver. The woman's hands shook as she tried to catch her breath. He dismounted, then helped her down carefully, his touch firm but gentle. She wanted to thank him, but the words wouldn't come. The fear, exhaustion, and confusion tangled together inside her chest. He led the horse behind a rock ledge and gestured for her to follow. They crouched there in silence for a long while. The wind carried the scent of sagebrush and rain. Far off, coyotes called to one another across the plains. Finally, he turned toward her. "They know stop," he said slowly, his English broken yet clear. They hunt. You ride with me now? No, go back. She nodded faintly. I have nowhere to go. He studied her face in the moonlight, his expression unreadable. Then, with a small nod, he said, Then you stay until safe. They traveled again at dawn, moving deeper into the wild lands where no lawmen dared to follow. The landscape changed as they climbed into higher ground-dense pine forests, replacing open plains. Streams whispering through rocky ravines. The woman began to notice how carefully he moved, how he seemed to know every sound, every shadow. When they stopped to rest by a river, he caught a fish with nothing but a carved spear. He cooked it over a small fire and offered her half. She hesitated, then accepted. As she ate, she tried to study him without being obvious. His eyes were deep brown, calm but alert, as if he lived in constant readiness. His skin bore scars that spoke of battles and hardship. Around his wrist was a strip of hide, darkened with age, perhaps a keepsake from someone long gone. She wanted to ask about his life, but something in his quiet strength told her not to intrude. Instead, he asked her name. She hesitated, then said softly, Clara. He nodded. Clara, he repeated carefully, his accent shaping it into something softer. I am Tawa, she smiled faintly. Tawa, she echoed, testing the sound. It suited him strong, rooted in the earth. For days they moved together through the wilderness. He spoke little, but she began to understand him through small gestures, the way he slowed the horse when she grew tired, how he handed her water before drinking himself, how he always built the fire downwind so smoke wouldn't give them away. Yet, despite his care, she could feel the distance between them, the unspoken divide between two worlds. Sometimes, at night, she caught him watching the stars with a faraway look, as if speaking silently to the spirits. She wondered what he prayed for. Maybe for his people who had lost their lands, maybe for the ones he couldn't save. One evening, as they camped near a narrow canyon, Clara finally asked the question that had been haunting her. Why did you help me that night? You didn't even know who I was. Tawa poked at the fire with a stick, his face lit by the soft glow. I see men chase you, he said. I see fear. I know what fear like that means. My people once run the same way. Soldiers come, burn home, take women, kill children. My father fight. My mother hide in cave. I was small. He paused, his voice low and steady. I help because I remember. Clara felt a lump rise in her throat. She looked into the fire, ashamed of how her people had treated his. I didn't know, she whispered. He gave a small shrug. Many do not know. Many do not want to. The silence that followed felt heavy, but not hostile. It was the silence of understanding to souls carrying the same ache for justice, though born in different worlds. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled. They think I killed a man, but I didn't. He died because he tried to hurt me, and no one believed me. Her eyes filled with tears she had tried to hold back for days. I didn't even get the chance to explain. Tawa didn't look surprised. He stared into the flames, his jaw tightening. White law listened only to white men, he said quietly. But truth still truth, even when no one see. His words struck her deeper than anything she had heard before. For the first time, she felt seen not as a fugitive, but as a human being broken by injustice. Days passed, and a fragile rhythm began to form between them. Clara learned to help gather firewood, to ride quietly through rough trails, to listen for danger the way he did. Sometimes, she caught herself watching him too long, the way his muscles moved when he lifted his bow, the way his voice softened when he spoke to his horse. She pushed those thoughts away. This was not a place for feelings. This was survival. But fate had other plans. One afternoon, they reached a hidden valley surrounded by high cliffs. Smoke rose faintly from a distant ridge. Tawa stopped, his expression sharpening. My people, he said. You stay. No speak until I say. Fear gripped her chest. Will they hurt me? He shook his head. If I speak for you, they listen. But no easy. They hate white faces. Too much blood, too much lie. He led her toward a small settlement of huts and fires. As they entered, a dozen faces turned, men, women, children. Their eyes narrowed, their voices low and wary. An older man stepped forward, his hair streaked with gray, his chest painted with symbols. He spoke quickly in their tongue, his voice firm. Clara couldn't understand, but she felt the tension rising like heat in the air. Toa answered him, his voice respectful but strong. The elder's gaze shifted to her, cold and distrustful. He said something sharp, pointing toward the ridge. Toa replied, and his hand came to rest protectively near her arm. The elder frowned, then gestured toward one of the huts. Finally, after a long silence, he nodded once and walked away. Toa turned to her. "They let you stay one night," he said. "Only one." She exhaled slowly. "Thank you." Inside the small hut, she sat quietly while Toa spoke outside with the others. She could hear fragments of voices, the flicker of anger, the low hum of grief. These were people who had lost much: homes, family, peace. She couldn't blame them for hating her kind. That night, the village gathered around the fire. Songs rose into the cool air, deep and rhythmic, echoing across the cliffs. Clara watched from the shadows, mesmerized. The flames danced on painted faces, on beads and feathers that glimmered like stars. She saw Toa among them, standing tall, his presence commanding quiet respect. When his gaze met hers across the fire, something stirred between the man, understanding that went beyond words. Two lives from different worlds, bound by the same wound, drawn together by the same storm. But peace was fragile in that valley. Just before dawn, a scout rode in from the west, shouting in their language. Toa's expression changed instantly. He spoke quickly to the others, then turned to her. "Men come from town," he said. "5 riders, guns. They follow your trail." Her heart dropped. "How did they find us?" He shook his head. "You leave tracks near river. They follow." Voices rose outside as the villagers armed themselves. Some looked at her with suspicion, blaming her for bringing danger. Toa stood before her, his tone sharp in his native tongue, defending her. But she could see doubt in their eyes. When the first gunshot echoed through the canyon, chaos erupted. Horses neighed, children screamed, and the men ran toward the ridge. Toa grabbed her hand. "We go," he said. She hesitated. "But your people, they fight for land." "I fight for you." He pulled her toward the horses as smoke began to fill the air. She could hear the shouts of approaching riders, the crack of rifles. Toa mounted swiftly and reached for her. She climbed behind him, gripping his waist as the horse surged forward. The wind tore through her hair as they rode out of the valley. Behind them, the sounds of battle echoed like thunder. The world blurred into motion, mountains, firelight, the cries of men fading into the distance. As they reached the far ridge, she looked back one last time. The valley burned under the pale light of morning. The people who had given her a chance were fighting for their survival. Guilt pressed heavy on her heart. Toa's voice broke through the roar of the wind. "No, look back. You live now." "For them?" She nodded weakly, tears spilling down her cheeks. The road ahead stretched into the wilderness untamed, endless and full of danger. But somewhere inside her, a new strength had begun to take root. She wasn't the frightened woman who had begged for mercy in the desert. She was part of something larger now, a story written in fire and courage, yet deep in her heart. She knew this was only the beginning. The men from town would not stop. The truth still waited to be revealed. And between her and the Apache, warrior wrote an unspoken bond that would soon be. Tested by the harshest of trials, the storm had only just begun. To rise over the land, the mountains loomed high and cold as the morning. Sun broke through the haze of smoke behind them. Clara held on tightly as the horse carried them higher into the ridges, her heart still pounding from the chaos they had fled. Below them, faint trails of dust marked where riders from the town might still be following. The memory of gunfire echoed in her ears, and though they were safe for the moment, she knew it wouldn't last. Tawa slowed the horse near a narrow ravine, shaded by pines. He dismounted quickly and helped her down, his movements sharp, alert. His dark eyes scanned the horizon before he spoke. "They no stop," he said. "They think you killer. They come until you're gone." Clara's voice trembled. "They'll kill you too if they find you helping me." He met her gaze steadily. "Then we stay hidden. My people know caves near river. We rest there, then decide." As they led the horse down through the twisting path, Clara couldn't stop thinking of the people they had left behind. The image of the burning valley haunted Hertha, Apache families fighting for their lives. The cries of the children, the glow of fire reflecting on terrified faces. She felt guilt clawing at her chest. "Tawa," she said softly, "your people. They were only trying to protect me. I brought death to their home." He stopped walking and turned toward her. "You not bring death. Death already there. My people fight every day. You only light that shows truth. Whitelaw call me savage, but they come take what is not theirs." His tone was calm, but carried years of bitterness. Clara saw in his eyes a deep pain that went beyond this single moment. She realized that his fight had begun long before she stumbled into his path. They reached a narrow cave hidden behind hanging vines. The air inside was cool and damp. He tied the horse near the entrance and motioned for her to sit. As he built a small fire, Clara noticed strange markings on the walls, painted symbols faded by time. "What do they mean?" she asked. Tawa looked up briefly. "Old stories. My ancestors. They speak to land, to sky, to fire. They say every life tied to earth. When earth hurt, people hurt too." She traced one of the symbols with her fingers, a circle surrounded by smaller lines like the sun. "Your people believe in balance," she murmured. He nodded. "White men forget balance. They take more than they give. That is why land angry." His words carried a weight she couldn't deny. She thought about the town she had fled, how greed and lies had twisted the hearts of men. How one man's betrayal had turned her into a fugitive. She remembered the way the sheriff looked at her, not with pity or belief, but with cold judgment. "They won't stop until I'm dead," she whispered. Tawa's hand stilled over the fire. "Then we make them see truth," he said quietly. Later that day, as the light dimmed, Clara sat near the cave entrance while Tawa scouted the surrounding hills. The silence of the forest pressed against her ears. Every snap of a branch made her flinch. She couldn't tell if it was fear or loneliness that weighed heavier. When he returned, his face was tense. "Tracks," he said. "3 men follow close. They camp by river." Her stomach tightened. "Are they from the town?" "Yes. One wear coat with star." "The sheriff." She looked down at her trembling hands. "They won't listen to reason, Tawa. They already decided what I am." He knelt beside her, resting a hand lightly on her shoulder. "Then we make them hear. But first, you must stay alive." That night, he left the cave to keep watch. Clara couldn't sleep. Her mind wandered through memories she wished she could erase. The saloon where she worked. The stranger who promised her a better life, the night he turned violent when she tried to leave. She remembered the struggle, the flash of his gun, and the way everything went silent afterward. When she awoke, he was dead and she was running. Now, far from that world, she sat in the flickering firelight with an Apache warrior guarding her life. By dawn, Tawa returned with fresh tracks drawn in the dust. "They move slow," he said. "Maybe wait for more men. We go north over ridge. I know old trail. Hard path, but safe." They packed quickly and set off through the rocky slopes. The sun was sharp, burning their skin. The trail was steep, and Clara's legs ached, but she didn't complain. Each step took them deeper into wild country, where the land grew harsher, more secretive as they climbed. They reached a plateau overlooking endless plains. Below, they could see smoke rising again, far in the distance. Tawa stared for a long time, his face unreadable. "Soldiers," he said. "Camp near water. They come soon for more land. Your people?" she asked softly. He gave a bitter smile. "They fight with arrows against thunder guns. But spirit strong. We no give up." Clara watched him closely. There was something in his eyes, a silent fire that would never die, even when hope seemed lost. she realized that he wasn't just protecting her. He was fighting for something far greater, something that had been taken from him long ago. As they continued onward, they reached an abandoned cabin hidden in the forest. It was old, half broken, but still standing. Inside, there were tools, a cot, and remnants of old supplies. Tawa checked each corner before allowing her in. "We stay here," he said. "For now." She walked around the cabin, touching the worn wood. "Who built this?" "Trapper," he said. "Long gone. Maybe taken by winter." They repaired what they could, using branches and bark to cover the holes in the walls. For the first time in days, Clara felt a fragile sense of calm. The air was heavy with pine and smoke, and though danger still lingered, the small fire in the hearth made it feel almost safe. When the night came, she sat near the window, watching the stars through the trees. Tawa sat nearby, sharpening his knife. "You think they'll find us here?" she asked. He didn't look up. "Maybe, but forests protect us if we listen. If you move with land, it hide you. If you fight against it, it show you to enemy." She smiled faintly. "You speak like the wind." He looked at her then, his eyes soft. "Winds speak truth. Always." Days passed in uneasy quiet. They gathered berries, hunted small game, and fetched water from a nearby stream. Tawa taught her how to move silently through the woods, how to read the signs of the land. She found herself learning quickly, growing stronger. But the unease never left her. Sometimes at night, she thought she heard voices in the distance, men shouting, horses moving through the dark. One evening, Tawa didn't return from scouting. The sun sank, and still he was gone. Clara paced the cabin, fear clawing at her chest. When the night grew thick, she grabbed the small knife he had given her and stepped into the woods. The forest was silent, except for the rustle of leaves. She followed the path he had taken earlier, her eyes darting between the shadows. Then she heard a muffled sound ahead. She crouched behind a fallen log and saw movement through the trees. Tawa was kneeling on the ground, surrounded by two men with rifles. One of them held a lantern, its glow casting sharp light on Tawa's face. The other kicked him hard in the ribs, shouting something about harboring a murderer. Clara's breath caught. She wanted to scream, but she forced herself to stay quiet. Her heart pounded as she watched the sheriff step out from behind a tree, his cold eyes glinting. "Where is she?" he demanded. "The woman. You think you can hide her in these hills?" Tawa spat blood, but said nothing. The sheriff struck him across the face with the butt of his gun. "You're going to tell me where she is, savage, or I'll hang you right here." Clara's hands shook. She knew she couldn't fight them alone, but she couldn't watch him die either. Slowly, she crawled backward through the brush, her mind racing for a plan. Back at the cabin, she grabbed the rifle that hung over the fireplace, old, rusted, but still loaded. Her hands trembled as she stepped back into the night. The forest seemed to whisper around her, every sound sharper, every heartbeat louder. When she reached the clearing again, the sheriff was tying Tawa's hands. She raised the rifle, tears stinging her eyes. She didn't want to kill, but she couldn't let them take him. Then, before she could move, one of the men turned, spotting her silhouette in the moonlight. "There," he shouted. A gunshot cracked through the air, splitting the silence wide open. The forest came alive with chaos, the echo of shouts, the flash of fire, the sharp scent of gunpowder. Tawa broke free, tackling the sheriff as the horses reared in panic. Clara fired once, missing by inches. But the distraction was enough for Tawa. To grab the gun from one of the men, smoke filled the clearing as the men scrambled for cover. Clara ran toward Tawa, ducking as another shot whizzed past her. He caught her arm, pulling her behind a tree. Their eyes met for a split second. Wild, terrified but alive, he whispered fiercely, "We run, now." And before she could answer, they vanished into the black heart of the forest, leaving behind the burning light of the lantern and the furious shouts of men who would not stop until they were both dead or captured. The chase had begun again, and this time there would be no turning back. The forest was darker than before, and every sound carried weight. Clara's heart pounded as she ran beside Tawa, their feet crashing through the undergrowth. Branches clawed at her dress, tearing fabric and skin alike, but she didn't stop. Behind them came the shouts of men and the steady rhythm of horses, growing louder with each passing second. The moon had vanished behind clouds, leaving the world swallowed in half light and shadow. Tawa slowed near a stream and motioned for her to crouch. He pressed a finger to his lips, listening. She could barely catch her breath, her chest burning, her hands trembling from fear. In the distance, the echo of boots and metal rang through the trees. The sheriff's voice barked orders, sharp and cruel. "They spread wide," Tawa whispered. "They hunt like wolves." "What do we do?" she asked. He glanced around, eyes searching the ground. "We use land. River hide our scent. Follow it north." They stepped into the icy water, wading carefully against the current. The cold bit through her legs, but it muffled their tracks. For a while the noise of pursuit faded, replaced by the gentle rush of water and the steady beat of her heart. Yet the peace didn't last long. A sudden flare of light cut through the trees behind them, lanterns. The men had found their trail again, faster. Tawa hissed. They stumbled through the water until it split into two branches. He chose the narrow path to the right, leading toward a rocky slope. The climb was brutal. Stones shifted underfoot, and the wet fabric of her dress made every movement harder. But Tawa was always there, reaching back, steadying her. His strength pulling her forward when she thought she would fall. When they finally reached a ledge overlooking the valley, they stopped. From here, the forest spread below like a sea of black waves. The lights of the search party flickered faintly in the distance. But there was no sign they were slowing. Toy looked at her, breathing hard. "They come with more soon. You stay here. I go down. Lead them away." "No," she said instantly. "They'll kill you." He met her eyes, calm but determined. "Better me than both." "You live, Clara. You tell truth one day." She shook her head fiercely. "No. If you go, I go. You said we stand, remember? I'm not running again." His gaze softened then, and for a moment, something unspoken passed between them, an understanding deeper than words. He finally nodded. "Then we fight smart." They moved quickly, setting up a false trail down the mountain. Tawa used broken branches and scattered tracks to lead the riders in the wrong direction. Then they hid in a shallow cave behind a wall of stones. The narrow space was cold and tight, forcing them close. Clara could feel the warmth of his skin and the rapid rhythm of his heartbeat. Outside, voices echoed through the forest. "She's here somewhere." "Spread out." A gunshot rang out, followed by another. Horses neighed in panic. Clara held her breath as footsteps crunched close to the entrance. Through a gap between the rocks, she saw the flash of lantern lights sweeping across the ground. Tawa's hand brushed hers, steadying her trembling. He whispered something soft in his native tongue, a prayer. Perhaps. She didn't understand the words, but the sound gave her strength. Minutes stretched into hours, or maybe it just felt that way. Finally, the footsteps faded and silence returned. Tawa waited a long time before moving the rocks aside. The forest had gone still again, though the faint glow of dawn was beginning to touch the horizon. They stepped out, exhausted and cold. "We safe now?" she asked. "For now," he said quietly, "but not long." They followed the ridge until they reached an open meadow where wildflowers had begun to bloom. The sight of it felt strange after so much darkness. Clara turned to him, her eyes heavy with worry. "You can't keep protecting me forever, Tawa. They'll never stop." He stopped walking, his jaw tightening. "I know protect you because I must. I do it because I choose." Something in his voice broke through her fear. She looked away, feeling tears welling up. "Why?" she whispered. He hesitated, then said softly, "Because when I see you, I remember hope." The words hung between them like sunlight breaking through clouds. But before she could respond, a distant shot shattered the silence. Birds scattered from the trees. Tawa turned sharply, eyes narrowing. "They find us again." Ran toward the western hills. This time the ground was open and bare, no forest to hide in, no river to cover their tracks. The sound of horses came fast behind them. Clara's legs burned, her lungs screaming for air. She stumbled, and Tawa caught her before she fell. "Keep going," he said. Almost there. Now they reached the edge of a cliff that dropped into a narrow canyon below. The river shimmered faintly in the distance. There was no path down, only jagged rocks and sharp drops. Clara looked at him, breathless. "We're trapped." Tawa scanned the cliffside quickly. Trap. Only choice. He pointed to a thin trail leading along the edge. "We take that." It was barely wide enough for one person, but they had no other way. They moved carefully, clinging to the rocky wall as the wind roared around them. Pebbles slipped underfoot, falling into the deep ravine below. Behind them, sheriff's men appeared at the top of the hill. Their shouts carried over the wind. "There they are." A gun fired. The bullet hit the rock near Clara's head, sending dust into her eyes. She gasped, nearly losing her balance. Tawa grabbed her arm, pulling her close. "Don't look down," he said firmly. "Just move." They edged along the cliff until they reached a small outcrop where the trail ended in a steep drop. The river below was far, its roar faint but constant. The sheriff's voice rang out again. "You can't run forever? Come back, and maybe I'll let you live." Clara's voice shook. "He'll kill us." Tawa stepped in front of her, shielding her body with his own. "He kill for sport." No mercy in him. He reached for his bow, eyes steady. "We stand here." She shook her head. "You can't fight all of them." He looked at her once more, his expression calm, almost peaceful. "Then I die as warrior, not hunted animal." The riders closed in, their figures dark against the rising sun. Dust swirled around them like storm clouds. Tawa raised his bow, loosing an arrow that struck the first man squarely in the chest. Another arrow flew, then a gunshot answered. He ducked behind a rock, the bullet grazing his arm. Clara's heart pounded as she crouched beside him, tearing a piece of her dress to wrap the wound. "You're bleeding." He smiled faintly. "Small wound. You worry too much." Another bullet hit the rock near their feet. They had nowhere to go now. The sheriff dismounted, his boots crunching on the gravel as he stepped closer. "This is the end," he called out. "Give me the woman, and maybe I'll spare your life." Mateo's jaw tightened. "She'll know yours to take." The sheriff laughed. "She doesn't belong to you either, savage. She's a murderer, and you're a fool for protecting her." Clara stood up suddenly, her voice rising. "I'm not a murderer," she shouted. "He attacked me. He tried to take everything from me." The sheriff's face twisted with scorn. "That's what they all say. The jury would have believed me before a woman like you." "Da-da, da-da." The tension sharp and clear. "Truth not need jury. Truth stand by itself." He notched another arrow, his movements calm despite the blood on his arm. The sheriff raised his gun, his finger tightening on the trigger. For a moment, time froze, the wind, the river. The distant cry of an eagle above them. Then came the sound of a gunshot, louder and closer than before. Clara screamed, reaching for Tawa as he stumbled backward. Dust rose, and she fell beside him, clutching his shoulder. He was still breathing, his eyes burning with determination even as pain rippled through him. The sheriff reloaded his gun slowly, stepping closer with a smirk. "You should have stayed in your place." But before he could fire again, thunder rolled in the distance, real thunder this time, not from a gun. The clouds above darkened suddenly, wind tearing across the ridge. The horses reared in panic, and lightning split the sky in a blinding flash. Clara tightened her grip on Tawa, her mind racing between fear and fury. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down, the storm roaring like the voice of the earth itself. The world had turned wild and alive around them. The sheriff steadied his aim again, shouting over the wind, "You can't hide from justice." But as the storm gathered and the river roared below, something inside Clara shifted. She rose slowly, standing between Tawa and the sheriff, her hair whipping in the wind. Her eyes no longer carried fear, they carried resolve. This was where it would end, one way or another. The truth would no longer stay buried under lies, and with the storm closing in, the final reckoning drew near. Thunder rolled across the canyon as the storm broke fully. rain pouring over the land like a long-awaited cleansing. Clara stood in front of Tawa, the wind whipping her hair and clothes, her face streaked with rain and dirt. The sheriff aimed his gun again, but this time his hand trembled. The fury in his eyes meeting something he couldn't name as strength in hers that refused to bend. Lightning flashed behind her, illuminating the cliffs, the river, and the faces of men who suddenly looked smaller in the face of nature's wrath. Tawa, bleeding but still standing, pushed himself up beside her. The storm howled around them, the sound drowning out the shouts and the thunder of hooves. Clara could feel the weight of everything that had brought her here, the injustice, the loss. All of it had built to this single moment. She stepped forward slowly, her voice strong despite the wind. "You call it justice," she said, her tone shaking but fierce. "But you only chase what you don't understand. You took everything from me because it was easier than believing the truth." The sheriff sneered, his wet hat dripping. "Truth don't matter when there's blood spilled." Tawa's voice cut through the storm, low but commanding. "Blood spilled because of lies. See that? See who really guilty?" The sheriff raised his gun higher, aiming at Tawa's chest. "Enough talk." The sky cracked open again, a roar of thunder shaking the ridge. The sheriff hesitated just a second, and, in that second, Tawa moved. He lunged forward, knocking the gun aside as it fired. The shot went wide, echoing into the canyon. The two men struggled, slipping in the mud, fists striking, grunts, mixing with the roar of rain. Clara watched, frozen in fear and helplessness, until she saw the sheriff reach for the fallen gun, without thinking. She grabbed a heavy branch from the ground and swung it hard. It struck the sheriff's arm, knocking the weapon away again. He fell to his knees, gasping, and Tawa seized the moment. He pinned him down, breathing hard, his knife pressed against the sheriff's chest butt. Then he stopped. His hand trembled. He looked up at Clara. "No more killing," he said quietly. "Let truth finish fight, not blood." She nodded, her voice breaking. "It's over." The sheriff glared up at them, drenched and defeated. "You'll hang for this," he spat. "Both of you." Clara shook her head slowly. "No. You will answer for what you've done." From behind them came the sound of hooves riders approaching fast. For a terrifying moment, she thought more men had come to finish them. But when she turned, she saw a group of riders bearing lanterns and badges. Not from the town, but from the county marshal's post. They must have followed the reports of the chase and the fires. The lead rider, a man with a gray beard and steady eyes, reined in his horse and called out, "Sheriff Dalton? What's going on here?" The sheriff froze. His power crumbled in an instant. The marshal dismounted, walking toward them through the rain. His eyes shifted between Clara and Tawa, then to the weapon lying in the mud. "We got word you were hunting a fugitive," he said. "But we also got witnesses saying you shot first, burned Apache land, and left 2 men dead without trial." Dalton's face went pale. "Lies!" he shouted. "This woman, she's a killer, and that savage helped her escape." The marshal looked at Clara. "Is that true, miss?" She took a shaky breath, meeting his eyes. "No, I ran because I was scared. A man tried to hurt me, and when I fought back, he died. The sheriff never gave me a chance to speak. He just wanted someone to blame." The marshal turned back to Dalton. "You got evidence she's guilty?" Dalton's mouth opened, then closed. He looked at the muddy ground, his lies crumbling with the storm around him. The marshal's voice hardened. "Put him in irons." 2 men stepped forward, grabbing the sheriff by the arms. He shouted and cursed, but it was no use. For the first time, Clara felt her knees weaken, not from fear, but from relief. The marshal turned to her again. "You'll need to tell your story proper, miss. We'll see that justice is done right this time." She nodded, tears mixing with the rain. "Thank you." When the riders left, taking the sheriff with them, only the sound of rain remained. The storm began to fade, leaving the sky streaked with soft light. Tawa stood beside her, silent, his shoulders heavy, but his eyes calm. "It's finished," looked softly. He looked toward the horizon. "No, storm always come back. But today, it pass." They stayed there until the first rays of morning broke through the clouds, painting the valley gold. The air smelled clean again, like a world reborn. Over the following weeks, the law cleared Clara's name. Witnesses from the town came forward revealing the sheriff's corruption, the lies he spread to cover his own crimes. The marshal made sure the truth was written down for everyone to see. For the first time, Clara walked through a town without fear, her head high, but she didn't stay long. The noise, the stares, and the hollow promises of safety made her restless. Her heart belonged to the open land, where truth was simpler, where the earth itself listened. She rode back toward the mountains, where the wind smelled of pine and freedom. She found Tawa near the same river where they had first met. He was tending to a young colt, the sun glinting on his long black hair. When he saw her, he smiled a quiet, knowing smile that said everything words couldn't. "I thought you were gone," he said. "I was," she replied, dismounting. "But not from you." He nodded slowly. "World call us different, but spirit no same." "Hey," she smiled. "Maybe the world will learn someday." They spent the evening by the river, watching the light fade into the water. The air was warm, the sound of crickets rising with the night. Clara felt peace for the first time in what felt like forever. "I used to think I was cursed," she said quietly. "Every place I went, I lost something. But maybe I just hadn't found where I belonged." Tawa threw another branch on the fire, watching it spark. "Belonging, not place," he said. "It is people you find." She looked at him, her heart full. "Then I've found mine." The days that followed were simple but full, rebuilding what had been lost. Helping his people recover from the fires the sheriff's men had left behind, the village began to heal. Children laughed again. The land, scarred but alive, slowly turned green as spring crept across the hills. Clara worked beside them, planting, carrying water, learning their ways. Sometimes at dawn, or rode through the mist-covered valleys, the world still quiet and half asleep. She would watch the rising sun catch in his hair and think how strange life was, how something born from pain could lead to peace. Word spread through the territories about the white woman who stood with the Apache warrior, about how truth had won where hate tried to rule. Some called it legend, others a lie. But those who saw them together, riding across the plains, knew it was real. Months later, Clara stood on the ridge above the canyon, the same place where it had all nearly ended. The wind brushed through her hair, carrying the scent of earth after rain. She closed her eyes, remembering the woman she had been, the one who ran, afraid and lost. That woman was gone now. Todd joined her quietly, his presence steady beside her. He pointed toward the horizon where the first stars were beginning to appear. "See that light?" he said. "It always come back after dark." She smiled, leaning into him. "Just like us." The sun dipped below the mountains, leaving behind a sky painted in gold and crimson. The land stretched wide and wild before them, free, unbroken, eternal. And in that endless silence between heartbeats, Clara finally understood what the journey had meant. It wasn't about escaping her past or proving her innocence. It was about finding courage in a place that had forgotten mercy, discovering love where the world least expected it. The wind shifted softly, wrapping around them like a promise. Together, they turned toward the valley, toward life, toward whatever came next. The river below kept flowing, whispering through the stones, carrying with it the story of a woman who once trembled and a warrior who taught her to stand.